Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Musicality Podcast. My name's Christopher Sutton and I'm the founder and director of Musicality, a website where we help passionate musicians to develop their inner musicality so that they can feel free, confident, and creative in music. Before we begin the full episodes of the show, I wanted to just take a few minutes to introduce myself and the podcast so that you know what's coming up. So I am a 33-year-old Londoner with a wife and a young daughter, and I've been a lifelong music lover and amateur musician. For the first 15 years or so of learning music, I felt like a bit of a fraud, because although I was practicing hard and I was getting good at playing the instruments, I'd see musicians who could play by ear or improvise, create their own music on the fly, and be confident sitting in with other musicians at a jam session or a gig. And those things just all seemed way beyond me. I felt like they must have some natural talent that I didn't. And so I persevered with learning music because I loved it so much, but I really felt limited and frustrated and, to be honest, a bit disappointed in myself, however hard I worked. Eventually, around 2008, I discovered this thing called ear training, and a whole new world opened up to me because I finally saw that all those skills which had seemed magical in music were actually learnable. It took time and effort for me to develop them for myself, but I gradually realized that the amazing musicians who I'd admired weren't necessarily gifted or talented. They had just learned to do these wonderful, creative, empowering skills, which for so many years I hadn't even known you could learn. Although I'm not a born businessman and I hadn't really planned to do it, I started a company in 2009 to help other people learn these incredible skills and tap into their inner natural musician. That company is Musicality, and we've since helped millions of musicians to develop these inner skills of musicality. I don't say that to brag, just to hopefully inspire you that you too can become more musical, and hopefully that's why you're listening to this podcast right now. This podcast is going to be all about musicality. Now, that's a word which you might instinctively kind of understand, but it doesn't have a single precise definition. At Musicality, we define it like this. Musicality is a set of inner skills which let you freely and confidently express yourself in music. And we have a whole set of skills that we think are part of musicality. We'll be covering all of these in more detail in future episodes of the show, but to give you a taste, we're talking about things like playing by ear, singing in tune, jamming with other musicians, having a good sense of rhythm, writing music, writing your own songs, writing music notation like on a traditional sheet music page, improvising a solo, talking intelligently about music, understanding music theory, clapping in time with a song, knowing your instrument inside and out, being able to tune your own instrument by ear, reading traditional music notation, sight reading music, meaning playing stuff you've never played before, playing from a lead sheet, performing live, and playing multiple instruments. Now, I'm sure as I listed those out, there were a few where you thought, oh cool, I can do that. And there were probably several others where you thought, wow, definitely can't do that, but I'd love to be able to. If so, you are in the right place. This podcast is going to be a mix of interviews and teaching. I'm going to be talking with some of the most inspiring and innovative music educators and musicians, and asking them about how they developed their own musicality, as well as asking for their top tips and techniques to help you improve. We'll also be doing teaching episodes where I'm going to share some of the insights and explanations which have helped members of Musicality to develop their own musicality. My goal is that this podcast is going to be super useful for you just by itself, but I should definitely mention that we do also have a membership program at Musicality which provides world-leading, in-depth musicality training and an unparalleled level of personal support and guidance. So if you find yourself enjoying the podcast, please do consider joining Musicality. Now, one thing to mention is that some of these podcast episodes are going to be long, and I know we all like short, bite-sized learning these days, but when you hear some of the people I'm going to be talking with, you'll see that it would have been a crime to cut them short. So if you think an hour-long podcast episode is just way too long, I'd encourage you to think about listening to it in 2 or 3 parts. That's one of the great things about podcasts. You're free to fit it into your own time, whatever way you like. And I'll be providing a recap at the end of each episode to remind you of all the most important points. So that's what the Musicality Podcast is all about. We've been preparing episodes in advance, so I already know we have some amazing stuff lined up, and I am seriously excited to finally share it all with you. Okay, so the last 3 things to mention are, number 1, how to subscribe. If you want to be sure to get every episode of the podcast as it comes out, please subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Number 2 is how to get even more. So if you visit musicalitypodcast.com, that's where we're going to have the show notes for each episode, including links to any resources mentioned, so that you can follow up on anything that caught your attention in the episode. And if you want even more, you can sign up for Podcast Insiders, where we'll be sharing extra bonus material and behind-the-scenes exclusive. That's at musicalitypodcast.com/insiders. And number 3, how to support the show. If you find yourself enjoying the Musicality Podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it in your podcast store. We'll have instructions at musicalitypodcast.com to make this easy for you, and I would so appreciate it. It helps more people to discover the show. The other thing is, as I said before, this podcast is brought to you by Musical U, and it's the members of Musical U that provide the funds we need to record and produce this show. So if you want to support the show and develop your own musicality, please consider becoming a member of Musical U. We've set up a special offer just for podcast listeners, and you can find that at musicalitypodcast.com/join. So that's it for this first ever episode. We're launching with several episodes on day 1, so that means you can immediately dive in right now to our first interview. Just remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. Thank you for listening and for giving our new show a try. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Musicality Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.